My mothers and sisters in Islam, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Today, inshallah, is our third lecture in the series which we have titled Building a Peaceful Home. And we started by talking about why it is important to build a peaceful home, what is the need for a home for human beings, what is the search for sukoon. Then yesterday we started talking about why pick a good foundation. And we talked about the difference between a shaky foundation, that of sand, and a strong foundation, that of rock. Okay? And then we also talked about, that if the foundation is not very strong of any home or any house, then when the weather is good, it doesn't matter that much. In the old days when we were being brought up, there were a lot of protective factors around us which protected our morals, our families, our children. In this day and age, with the climate, and I'm not talking about the weather right now, I'm talking about the emotional, cultural, social climate that we are raising our families in, it is extremely important to have a strong foundation. We talked about the two foundations on which currently we are building our homes and why it is, the two foundations that we are building on these days, which are the foundations of children and the foundation of materialism, and why these are not very solid foundations on which to build a home. Okay, and today, inshallah, we will carry on with that conversation and talk about what to do instead. What is this foundation of rock that we're talking about? Okay. But before we do that, I had mentioned that if people had questions, please email me. And by the way, thank you so much for all the messages. I really appreciate them, because when you are in the middle of a subject, it's very hard to look at it, dispassionately and to actually figure out whether what you have, put together works or not. So when I get feedback, it's extremely valuable, because it tells me what's landing, what's not landing, what needs more clarification, right? So one of the questions that came up yesterday was a very good one, and that was, because yesterday we spent a long time talking about how we should make our children independent, and if they can do things for themselves, we shouldn't do it for them, right? So the question was that I tell my children to manage themselves, to solve their own problems, but the children don't like it. So they get upset with me and they said that you should help us. Okay. So very good question. Maybe a lot of the parents in this room can relate. So the first point is, again, in a sense, it's the children's job to complain. Okay. So the idea is that if children don't like what we are doing, it's not the end of the world. When we are giving medicine or when we are doing something at home, sometimes growth, discipline, it's not very comfortable, okay? However, it does not mean that we don't take what they're doing, what they're saying seriously. In other words, we don't just dismiss it, right? So when I'm talking about training children to do things for themselves, it is about training. It is not throwing them in the deep end. That's not what we're talking about. So let's take an example of, for example, telling children or teaching children how to take the public transport, right? Now, what are our options? One is that we drive them till the end of time, which some of us choose to do, and if you have the time, great, continue to do it. However, if your goal is to make your child comfortable navigating travel on their own, which is actually a life skill, right? So if you wanted to do that, you would not just tell them when they were 12, okay, goodbye, lock the door and come home when you're done. That's not what you would do. So any skill that we want to teach our children has actually 4 steps. The first step is that you show them how to do it. You train them, you actually do it with them, right? The first step is you show them. So if when you're on public transport, you will show them, this is where you get off, this is how you buy the ticket. You are narrating as you are doing it. Right? The second thing is you do it together, in which means that you are literally accompanying them, and they are, they're taking the lead and you're doing it together. Right? The third step is that they show you. So in other words, you're with them, you're on public transport, but you are not there taking the lead. So you're allowing them to make a little mistake. You are, later on you can, get some feedback of how, what was it like for them. And the fourth step is that they do it on their own. Does that make sense? So, so again, when I'm saying, help children, or we should train children to do things for their own, please do not misunderstand. I'm not saying just, take them in a swimming pool, throw them on the deep end and hope they swim. No, that's not how we do things, right? So once you've done all of those steps, then you need to be confident that you have done your job, that you have trained them, and now, inshallah, they can do it on their own. And obviously, if the weather is bad, they will complain. And that's okay. If the weather is bad, we complain too, right? We don't want to go. So it's okay. Like, sometimes it's, complaining is not such a bad thing unless we take it personally. So today, inshallah, we'll talk about the foundation of taqwa. Why it is, I'm actually going to present a case to you, like in the sense that why is it a good idea to base a house on this solid foundation. And then we'll actually go through a sermon of Imam Ali alayhi salam from the Nahj al-Balagha, where he talks about, it's called the Sermon of Muttaqeen, and many of us may be familiar with it. But today, inshallah, we'll obviously just choose bits from it, and we will literally look at it as a blueprint for our family, how we can use the things that he's talking about in family relationships. Then we will talk about, how do we enter this door, the door of the home that we're talking about. Remember, our topic is building a peaceful home. So what's the door to it? How do we enter it? And in those lines, we talk a little bit about the history of marriage in the West and what is the philosophy of marriage in Islam compared to that. Okay, so it is a tall order, and I don't know how far we will reach. But again, I think we've been together for a while, that I will always have more things that I can continue with. And inshallah, at some point you will get the content, if not here, in some other place. Okay, so let's begin. The verse for reflection today is from Surah Nisa, where Allah says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Ya ayyuhan nas. So it's addressing all of mankind. And he's saying, Ittaqur rabbukum allazi khalaqakum min nafsin wahida. He is the one. Why should you have? And taqwa, again, it's been translated many different ways. The translation that I like, the English word for it, is called reverence your Lord. Right? Reverence is not fear. It is actually an acknowledgement of His greatness, and it is understanding that it makes sense to follow a higher intellect. If you know what that means, if you understand, right? So once we understand His greatness, then it is not a fear. It is actually just complete submission, because the most intelligent is he who understands that there is a greater intelligence and follows that, right? So reverence your Lord who created you from a single soul and created its mate. So again, right off the bat, it's telling us that our creation is one. It's from a single soul, and we have been created in pairs. So Allah has created, and again, Islam is very clear that the creation of man and woman was from the same pure soil. All of these stories that we hear sometimes, how woman was created from Adam's rib and all of that, are not part of our faith. Okay, so it is, we've been created from the same, and again, so what does it imply? It implies complementarity in the genders. Okay, and from the two, and has spread abroad a multitude of men and women. In other words, He's the one who made human beings spread all across the world. And again it says, Wattaqullahu allazi tasaaluna bihi wal arhamakum. He's the one whom you call upon for your relationships. In the old days, the Arabs, when they would swear oath, they would say by God and by your relationships, right? But in this verse, what Allah is saying is that be careful of your family relationships. So again, taqwa is very, very related to how we deal within the family. And he ends by saying, Inna Allaha kana alaykum raqiba. He is the one who is a watcher over you. He is raqib. So raqib means someone who takes care of you. He knows, first of all. So why is taqwa important? He's the one who's created us, right? So if a person even makes a machine, they know what makes it work, number one. He wrote the manual, number two. He cares for us, number three. So He has created rules not to, sometimes we honestly think that all the rules of Islam are to give us a hard time. They are not. Once we recognize the greatness of God, and again, when we're talking about the shifting sands of time, today we'll see how clear it is that when we are based our life on a solid foundation, it is so much more stable and not confusing. Because I don't know about you, but honestly, the work I do, I can see that there is a crisis in families right now. There is a crisis in relationships. First of all, in forming them, in the basic getting together, it's hard because again we have lost that. We are going in anyway. We'll come to that. So again, he's watching over you. He has your best interests at heart. He is not a God who created and then left human beings to themselves. You know how we're saying, even as parents, in order to discipline our kids or to train them, we train them step by step, right? So Allah, the meaning of Rabb is what? Is somebody who brings you to perfection step by step. Okay. We know that even before we came into this world, He created the environment for our complete physical perfection. Right? The environment in the womb was so that we would get everything that we needed before we came into this world. Right? Similarly, He sent down guidance and He did all of this so that we would fulfill. So in other words, He has set us up for success. That's what I'm trying to say. How we set up our children for success by creating an environment where they succeed. Similarly, Allah has made this world, has made the rules so that we can achieve perfection. Okay. So again, this is the case for taqwa. Like, why do we need to base our lives on this? Okay. Another thing is that especially when we are, when we have built our homes on sand, for example, it's very confusing because, like we'd see in the history of marriage, things change every few years. What do we do? So taqwa gives us the foundation of a God-centered life, gives us a very clear direction in which to go. It is not confusing. It is simple. The problem is that we really lose track of where we should be focusing. In this day and age, we are all focused on our rights. How many of us know what I'm talking about, right? When this is my right as a child, this is my right as a parent, this is my right as a wife, this is my right as a husband, and I don't know if we'll come to that or not, but lots of you have been asking about rights of spouses. But the idea is that rights and responsibilities can only take us so far. Rights can. What do I mean by that? In a healthy family, in a stable relationship, people are not focused on their rights. People are not focused on getting 50-50. They're not focused on getting. What they're focused on is the concept of ihsan. So again, what does being connected to Allah teach us? He deals with us. Can you imagine if Allah dealt with us based on justice? Can you just imagine that for every wrong thing, we would get a smack? Can you just imagine? So when we are connected to Him, and inshallah we'll talk about, basing our families on the concept of rahmah at some point. But the idea is that when we are connected to Him, then we need to deal with ihsan. Ihsan is a very high standard. So taqwa gives us a very, very high standard of dealing with other human beings. Now again, what Facebook will tell you, and we'll go through some lovely Facebook memes, which are like the worst relationship advice ever. Okay. It will tell you, have your boundaries. Don't let anyone take you for granted. Don't do this. Don't do that. If somebody doesn't do your worth, walk out, right? I mean, they may not say walk out, but you know what I'm saying, right? Maturity is walking away from the drama. Are you kidding me? Like, honestly, no relationship would last if we listen to all of that, right? So the idea is, and it's not a thing of weakness. When we are taking control of our own actions, it is an empowering thing. Why? Who do we have control over? At the end of the day, who do we have control over? We cannot, despite those of us with young children think, we can use emotional blackmail when they're older, but honestly, it doesn't work very well, right? And we certainly don't have physical control anymore, right? we do not have control over anyone else. So when we take matters into our own hands and live by our own set of values, it is the most powerful place as a human being. Okay. So let's talk about, and without this, by the way, without this, when we are focused on getting, and when we are focused on any other thing, our self-interest and our ego will definitely blind us. Let's take some examples. So imagine that we are, so there's all women here. And again, for anyone, none of us are allowed to use anything against our spouses or our children. Okay. Whatever we talk about today. So imagine that there is a spouse who does not like to part with money. Okay, they're very stingy, and you want things, and they have the money, but they won't share it. Okay. Now, our self-interest will, if we are thinking only in terms of our ego, then we are going to make all sorts of excuses for behaving in a way that is not ihsan. So we may say like, okay, I'm going to start, putting aside money. I'm going to start hiding money. I'm going to start hiding receipts. I'm going to, and we justify these things to ourselves, right? We say it's okay because of what they're doing, right? What does being connected to Allah, what does the foundation of taqwa tell us? That it does not matter what anyone else in life is doing, because we are only accountable, first of all, for our own deeds, and we can only live from our set of values. When we do that, then can you see how our actions will be different, right? Does that make sense? Okay. So now let's talk a little bit. And are there any questions? By the way, I see it's a bit of a heavy feeling today. So what does a God-centric home look like? So there's a sermon in Najal Balagha, which is sermon 193, which many of us may have heard about or read about. It's called the Sermon of Hammam sometimes, right? So we know that Hammam was a very close companion. He was a very pious man. And he asked Imam Ali alayhi salam that, I want to know what is taqwa, so tell me. And Imam Ali, knew that he was of a very delicate, sensitive nature. So Imam Ali said, do good deeds, have taqwa. And he did not want to say anything else. But then Hammam persisted. He said no. And we have many stories like this of how the companions who were very close to our Imam, they used to nag them a bit, right? They used to bug them. That, no, tell me more. I want to know, right? So he was kind of that, and other people joined him, and so Imam started. So this is a very long khutbah, very long in the sense that it has a lot. Every sentence you could spend a week on. It's very, very deep. Okay. So and what it said is that once he finished, when Imam finished telling him, Hammam actually fell into a swoon and he died. He died while he had fainted. That's the kind of impact these words had on him, right? And Imam goes on to say that this is the impact of the truth on a soul which is ready to accept the truth, right? So please don't nobody fall into a swoon, okay? But the idea is that, so I've picked 10 things from the khutbah, which relate specifically, he's not talking about families. I want to give it context, right? He's talking about how you can be God conscious and what is your behavior look like. So I've picked a few things which, particularly make sense in context of family relationships. So the first thing he says is they always speak truthfully, rightly, and to the point. To the point. So women could really learn from this, right? So the idea is that they have very good communication, number one, and that people trust them. When you speak the truth and you say things to the point, you build trust. And we will, inshallah, spend the entire lecture on trust, because trust is one of those foundational things for a relationship. We'll get to that. The second thing he says is the way of their life is based upon moderation. In other words, they are middle of the road. They're not extreme in any way. The third thing, which is very, very interesting, he says their mode of dealing with other people is founded on their goodwill, fellow feeling, and courtesy towards them. What does this mean? In psychology and in family relationships, there is the concept which we call a positive perspective. A positive perspective means that you have goodwill, exactly what he's talking about. That you and I, we have a relationship that you keep doing things for me and I keep doing things for you. And I don't mean physical things, it could be many different things, right? It could be that I listen to you or you listen to me. Every time I do that, every time we do something positive for each other, it is like putting money in our bank account, in our emotional bank account, right? And when we have a high emotional bank account with someone, so the idea is we have a separate emotional bank account with every human being we meet. So for example, with my daughter, I would have a bank account just between her and me, right? Then I would have one with my spouse, I would have one with each of my children. Now, when that bank account is full, in other words, she's respectful, she does things to please me, I am respectful, I do, I keep my word, things like that, we are putting money in the bank account, okay? When that emotional bank account is high, we have a positive attitude and relationship with each other. So, for example, if we were to, if she would say, you know what, I'm going to do this for you, and she didn't, right? She didn't follow through or I didn't follow through. If our relationship has a positive perspective, we will let that slide. It would be a withdrawal for sure, but because we have a healthy balance, it wouldn't be the end of the world. Does that make sense? Yeah. However, if I have a relationship, say, with one of my children or with my spouses, where things are really not good, so each interaction that we have is not so positive. It could just be a raised eyebrow, it could be a oof, it could be, things in relationships are very subtle, by the way, extremely subtle, right? So every time I do that, it's a minus. It's a minus from that bank account. Now, once that bank account becomes very depleted, then even little things become a big thing. You know what I mean? So all of us have relationships in our lives where we're not willing to let things slide. Every time we have an interaction which is negative, we tell ourselves, see, one more evidence, right? One more reason why this person is not trustworthy. And I don't mean trust in the sense of truth, but I just mean that I can't count on them. You're getting what I'm saying, right? Now, when that happens, we call it negative sentiment override. A negative sentiment override means that the relationship is so distressed or conflicted that it's running on empty. There is nothing in the emotional bank account. And, one of the things to know about the bank account is that it's much easier to make withdrawals than to put deposits. This is the nature of human interactions. I'll give you one example. So say if I gave each of you $10 right now, okay? How good would you feel? From 0 to 10, how good would you feel? 2, 3, right? $10, not a big deal. You'll go to Tim Hortons, take a friend maybe. Okay? Now imagine that you're going on the bus or, you find that somebody has stolen $10 from you. On a scale, see, everyone's eyebrows are raised. It's the same amount of money. So why does it make you feel worse than when somebody does good for you? Sorry? It's a loss, but the loss is the same as the gain, right? $10 is $10. But again, this is human psychology, and it's a very long subject, but just to touch on it, just to know that we need to keep any bank balance that we have with every individual member of our families very high. Because guaranteed, there will be times when we make withdrawals. And so you need that cushion. You need that cushion so that when you do annoying things, it doesn't distress the relationship too much, okay? So again, now Imam has said this in one sentence, right? And that's the beauty of him, right? So the mode of dealing with other human beings is founded on their goodwill, fellow feeling, and courtesy towards them, right? So every time we're courteous, and by the way, lots of very good research on love, that love between anyone, we're not talking about romantic love, we're talking about love between any two human beings, is built in very small interactions at the same time. So if you and I share a positive moment of connection with each other, that is a deposit in our bank account. Okay? And that's why, by the way, on a related subject, when we are dealing with community members, right? When we are dealing with this kind of lens, that we already, by you and I sharing a space and sharing the farsh of Hussein, we already should have really high bank balances with each other, right? And when we do that, that's why when little things happen, inshallah, we have the ability to let go. We don't hang on to little things, okay? So the next point he makes is that they bear, and by the way, when I'm saying next point, is the next point I've picked, okay? The khutbah is much longer. They bear hardships and sufferings as happily as they enjoy comforts. What does this mean? That we are resilient. In psychology today, there's a term called anti-fragile. Anti-fragile means what? Fragile is what? That you do something else and you fall apart, right? Anti-fragile is that every single hardship or something that comes to you makes you stronger. And again, that's what, in our faith, that's what we're told, that Allah sends us trials and tribulations and challenges to help us grow. Okay, so exactly. So when they face any challenge, and by the way, remember I said yesterday that when the foundation is strong, that's when you really, it really shows up when things are shaky outside, right? What do I mean by that? So imagine that, I'll give you one example, people of my age, for example, or a lot of us are dealing with aging parents, right? And when our parents are aging, many a times we have to make decisions around their health, around their care, and all of that. Now, very often we find that in families, when families are taking care of the parents, suddenly sibling rivalries that were hidden for 30, 40, 50 years come to light. Does anyone know what I'm talking about? Right? Sorry. So why? It's not because when things were good, when things were okay, all of these things were hidden. The cracks did not appear in the foundation till it was challenged. Similarly, when people are going through economic hardship, your marriage will be tested like nothing else if your spouse or you lose a job. If you lose your home, if a big challenge comes. And that's why we need to build our houses, we need to strengthen our foundation when things are good. Because when things are challenging, it's very hard to focus on the foundation because then you are in defensive mode, right? Then you're only working on survival. The fifth point is that they harm nobody. Their temper is controlled and people expect good out of them and consider themselves immune from their harm. In modern language, this would mean that we do not walk on eggshells around them. You know the term, walking on eggshells, right? So we know that some people are so grumpy that you are scared, that you are walking on eggshells so that they don't get upset, right? So again, a person who is connected to God is the opposite of that. People, and by the way, when you are secure from somebody's temper, that's how you can build intimacy. You cannot build intimacy without vulnerability. And in order to be vulnerable, what you need, safety is the first thing, right? And inshallah, we will also discuss this later. Number 6, they do not indulge in excessive eating and pleasure seeking. Again, moderation. What is the focus of your life? If your life or your home revolves around what is the next restaurant we're going to, or what is the next vacation we're going to, then there's nothing wrong with it. It's not a very strong foundation, okay? They spend their nights carefully in studying the Quran and they try to find ways from this holy book for improvements of their mind. Again, if we call ourselves Muslim and we want this to be a guide of our lives, we cannot do that without reading the manual. We cannot. So it's like a basic qualification that if you want to have a God-centered home, you need to study the Word of God, right? Many people I find, especially young people, they're very away from religion, right? And it is something that we need to take seriously. By the way, as parents, as a community, we need to acknowledge the doubts that they have, right? However, I'll tell you what I usually tell young people because it seems to make sense to them. One of the ways to drive them more away is to come down about how God is going to punish them, right? If they have trouble believing in God, they're going to run the other way when we threaten them with punishment, right? So, what I tell young people is, sure, let's have a conversation. If you have a doubt, it's fine. Don't rest in the doubt. It's okay to have doubts, but the stakes are very high. You need to convince yourself one way or the other, right? Number one. Number two, if you're talking about how the Quran doesn't make sense in this day and age, you can't really do that without having read the Quran. You cannot. So I had a whole group, I think there were about 70 of them. And there was this one whole group who was really, and I honestly take young people's objections very seriously because it teaches us a lot, right? And I said, okay, so where is this coming from? What ayats are you confused about? Let's talk about it. And they said, well, I don't know, we haven't read about it. So I said, you know what? You owe it to yourself. Like if you were arguing in a school or in a court of law or at work, and you say, I'm going to do a presentation to disprove your point, but I haven't read what you're talking about, nobody would take you seriously, right? So you owe it to yourself to do some research before you can have an intelligent conversation. The eighth point is that they're not satisfied with the quality and quantity of work done by them in the cause of religion and humanity. They set very high standards of efficiency for their work, and they feel nervous that that it is impossible for them to reach those high standards. What does this mean? They're achievement oriented. Islam is not a religion for being laid back and drifting through life. It's not. We have very limited time, and Allah tells us very clearly, if we do not use this time wisely, we are going to regret it. If not in this life, certainly in the next life, right? So in other words, also, so they have meaning and purpose in their lives beyond the day to day. Why is this so important? When we don't have meaning and purpose in our lives, when we're only focused on what the current drama, and I don't mean dramas that you see on video or YouTube, I'm talking about the family dramas, because definitely there will be family dramas in everyone's life, right? Or there will be your house that is breaking apart like mine is right now, or there would be many different things that's happening, right? When we have nothing else in our lives of meaning, purpose, and passion, then this becomes your focus. So, for example, my dishwasher has not worked for 1 month. Okay, and it's a challenge. Okay, we are, I guess, very used to these things, and it is, let's say, a source of discussion in our house whether or not we should get a new dishwasher. Right now, if I did not have something else to occupy my time by, I would actually be really mad. Okay, because it's a significant source of inconvenience to me. However, because I have other things to do, I am occupied, my attention is elsewhere. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So when we have only one thing in our lives, what happens, and when that one thing, so that's why, remember we said that when we focus our entire lives on children, and then our children let us down, our entire life falls apart. Why? Because we have tunnel vision. We can only see a child. When that thing is not working, there's no light at the end of the tunnel. There is only the child. When our lives are bigger than the problem, when we have other things, then we have a more expansive view of what is working in our lives and what is not. So how does this relate to families? Research shows that couples, by the way, who are very happily married and couples who are struggling in their relationship have the same number of problems. Exactly the same. The difference is that couples who are happily married, and by extension families who are happily involved with each other, are able to put the problems in their place and not let the problem take over their entire life. Does that make sense? Okay. So in other words, if you want to forget your small problems like dishwashers and leaking roofs, take on bigger problems in the world. Really, I'm not kidding you. So if you have meaning and purpose, if you're working towards a cause, it's not going to matter. Those little things just fall away in life. How do they deal with mistakes? This is a really important one. So two things. When they are dealing with other people, he forgives those who have harmed him, fully knowing that they have wronged him. In other words, they're not dumb. They know when people have made mistakes, but they choose to let go. Extremely important. The second part of it is when they've made a mistake. I thought this was just brilliant. Only Imam Ali can say these things, right? Before anybody has to bear testimony to his fault, he accepts and owns it. So defensiveness, by the way, is one of the biggest emotional toxins in a relationship. If somebody is complaining to you about something, whether it's your child or your spouse or a friend or a parent or anyone, and instead of accepting or at least considering what they're saying, the tendency, and it's very tempting to say, but you know this yourself, right? And we try to blame the other person. What Imam is saying that a person of God, a person who bases his life on taqwa, does the exact opposite. Before anybody has to bear testimony to his fault, he accepts and owns it. He never misappropriates anything entrusted to him. Also, words of other people, right? Privacy, secrets of other people. He never forgets what he has been told. He does not slander anybody, and he does not harm his neighbors, right? So in other words, two things. The way they deal with mistakes is the highest level of accountability for themselves. Again, taking responsibility for what you can control. And as far as other people are concerned, you have an attitude of forgiveness. By the way, many of us, we tend to live the exact opposite. When we have done something, say if I promise my child I will do this, right? And I don't. What will I tell myself? At least I made an intention. I'll make excuses for myself. I will judge myself based on my good intention. True? How many of us do that, right? I meant to, I'm sorry, I forgot, right? When other people do something, we judge them on their behavior. True? We will say, but you said this and this and this. What Imam is teaching us that in order to be a person of God, we have to flip that around. When we are focused on ourselves, we hold ourselves accountable for our behavior. When we're dealing with other people, we give them the benefit of the doubt and we hold them to their good intentions rather than where they slipped. Okay. And lastly, every morning finds him starting the day with prayers of the Lord. Of nights, he is cautious that he may not carelessly waste those hours in comfort and ease. He starts his days happy with the thought that the Lord has given him another day to do his duty. So three things. They start their day with prayers. Again, the Quran keeps telling us, وَأَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةِ. Not just pray occasionally, but establish prayers. What does established prayers look like in a home? It means that it is a structure of your existence. It means that you plan your life according to the time of prayers rather than try to fit in the prayers according to what else is happening in your life, right? This is somewhere where I know that I could definitely do better, right? And you end the day again in remembrance of your Lord, and you show gratitude. Again, when we learn to show gratitude to Allah, and we will talk inshallah more about this as well later, then we can have an attitude of appreciation and gratitude for our family members as well. So I think that's a lot for today, and inshallah tomorrow we will continue. But again, the idea is, when we say good lecture, bad lecture, that doesn't mean anything at all. What is going to impact our life is even if we take one thing of Imam Khomeini said this, right? That if the Muharram makes the difference, the wing of a fly in our lives. And again, when we look at ships, ships are huge, big things, right? And what moves the ship in one direction or the other? Do you know? Sorry? It's actually what is called the trim tab. It's not even the radar, it's the trim tab. The trim tab is about this big in a huge, big ship, right? And when we change direction a little bit, our entire direction can change. So again, I invite you to pick on anything, just one thing, right? And if we can make those changes, then inshallah we can change our lives.